In the endless dark of space, stories carried more weight than ships of steel. Whole civilizations rose and fell, but legends lasted longer than empires. Among the billions of stars, one legend burned brighter, stronger, and more terrifying than the rest. His name was whispered in fear. His victories were sung in trembling awe. To many, he was not only a warrior, but a force of nature itself. His name was Zerath, the undefeated alien champion. For more than a century, Zerath had never known defeat. His rise began on a distant battlefield, where he crushed the armies of an insectoid empire with only his claws and the power of his body. From that moment forward, his reputation grew, spreading from planet to planet like fire on dry fields. He became more than a soldier. He became an icon of destruction, a living reminder that some beings were born not to live peacefully, but to dominate all who dare to stand in their path. Zerath's form was something out of nightmares. Standing more than 3 times the height of a human, his body was a blend of flesh and living armor that pulsed as if it had its own heartbeat. His fists could break steel. His roar could shake the air itself. When he stepped into the great arenas of the galaxy, the crowds filled billions of seats across thousands of worlds through the holoscreens. Children hid their faces. Adults cheered his name. Enemies prayed to never face him. And every single time, without exception, Zerath walked away from a battlefield as the victor. The arenas themselves were no simple theaters. They were colossal battle domes built at the very heart of empires, designed to test the greatest warriors across the stars. Beasts bred for war, cybernetic titans, warlords with armies at their backs, all fell defeat of the alien champion. Some lasted minutes. Some survived hours. None survived the final strike. Each kill was marked in the records. Each win was carved deeper into the fear of the galaxy. What made Zerath most terrified was not only his strength, but the truth that every opponent who faced him believed, deep down, that maybe they could be the one to bring him down. And yet, each time they failed, their failure only made his legend larger. He did not simply fight his enemies. He broke them. He crushed their hope. He took their courage and turned it into dust beneath his armored feet. Years became decades. Decades became a full century. And still, no one had ever beaten him. He stood like a mountain at the center of the galaxy, an unshakable symbol of alien power. Even when he grew older, his strength did not fade. If anything, it became sharper, more dangerous, like a blade honed over time. He was more than undefeated. He was untouchable. Across the stars, whispers spread. They were not words of courage, but questions of despair. Who could ever defeat the undefeated? Some believed he was immortal. Others believed he was chosen by the gods of war. Entire generations had been born, lived, and died without ever seeing him lose a single fight. For those people, his victory was as natural as the sun rising. It was something certain, fixed, eternal. And yet, within those whispers of fear, there also grew something else. A seed, a small, dangerous idea that spread like a quiet flame. What if someone outside the great alien empires could stand against him? What if someone from a species no one respected, no one feared, could step forward? What if a human, fragile and small compared to the giant of the galaxy, dared to face him? Humans were seen as weak, soft, and ordinary. They were not known as conquerors. They did not control vast star empires or wield weapons that could shatter planets. They were considered simple, almost forgettable among the many races of the galaxy. And yet, they had a history hidden beneath their calm faces. A history of survival, of defiance, of fighting wars against impossible odds. Still, when the idea first surfaced, most laughed. The thought of a human facing Zerath was absurd. It was a joke told in bars, in military camps, in the back alleys of spaceports. The alien champion had destroyed armies. How could one fragile human ever stand against him? To imagine it was madness. But legends have always thrived on madness. They are born not from what is reasonable, but from what seems impossible. And sometimes, impossibility itself becomes a spark for something greater. In the hidden corners of the galaxy, whispers grew louder. One day, Zerath will fall. And when he does, it will not be by the hand of another monster. It will not be by the hand of a titan. It will be by the hand of someone no one expected. A human. Those words were spoken quietly at first, then more boldly, until the rumor became a prophecy that both terrified and excited the masses. The arenas grew more crowded. The crowds hungered not only for blood, but for the impossible. They wanted to see if the whispers were true. They wanted to know if the day would come when the champion would be shattered. The galaxy watched, waited, and dreamed. And deep within the cold silence of space, a single human warrior set his eyes on the undefeated champion. His footsteps would soon shake the ground that no one had dared to disturb. The legend of Zerath was not yet broken, but for the first time in 100 years, it trembled. The great arena of Carvo's prime glowed like a burning star in the night sky. From orbit, ships circled like insects around flame, carrying thousands of travelers who came to see the impossible. On the ground, billions more tuned their hollow screens to the broadcast, their voices joined together in a roar that shook the cities. A fight was coming, a fight that will be remembered for centuries. And yet, when the gates opened and the challenger stepped into the light, the noise did not rise. It fell. It was a human. The crowd stared, confused at first, then broke into laughter. Some shouted insults. Others shook their heads. A few were angry, believing this was an insult to the arena itself. To stand against Zerath, the undefeated champion, was supposed to be an honor reserved for titans, monsters, and warlords. And yet here was a lone human, small compared to the giants, walking calmly into the sands of history. His name was Elias Kane. He wore no heavy armor of gold or crystal like the champions before him. His clothing was simple, a dark combat suit, reinforced but not grand. On his hip hung a blade forged of steel and human craftsmanship, plain compared to the alien weapons that could sing with energy. There was nothing in his appearance that screamed power. He looked like a soldier, not a legend. He looked ordinary, and yet there was something in the way he walked. He did not rush. He did not tremble. His eyes moved across the arena, not with fear but with calm study, as if every grain of sand mattered. The jeers of the crowd bounced off him like rain on stone. He did not raise a fist in defiance. He did not bow in respect. He simply walked to his mark, silent, steady, unbroken. The announcer's voice filled the air. A booming sound carried through every speaker across the stars. Behold, the challenger, a human warrior from the backwaters of Seoul, Elias Kane. The laughter grew louder. The audience howled with mockery. To them, this was entertainment, nothing more. They would watch Zerath crush this fragile creature in seconds. It would be a quick fight, a joke written into the record books. Another victory for the undefeated. But Kane did not hear their laughter. His thoughts were not on the crowd. They were on the enemy he had come to face. He knew the stories. He knew the fear. He had studied every fight, every movement, every strike Zerath had ever thrown. For months he had prepared in silence, away from the eyes of the galaxy. And now, standing in the heart of the storm, he felt none of the doubt that others expected. He felt only the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Beyond the gates, a low rumble shook the arena. The sound was deep, heavy, like thunder trapped in the belly of the earth. The crowd silenced instantly. They knew that sound. It was the sound of the champion. The gates tore open, and Zerath stepped into the light. The alien was more terrifying in person than any broadcast could ever show. His body shimmered with living armor that pulsed as if alive. His arms were thick as pillars, his claws long enough to pierce tanks. His eyes glowed with a light that seemed older than time. With every step, the ground cracked beneath his weight. When he raised his arms, the crowd erupted with a single word that rolled like a storm. Zerath! 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 He basked in the adoration. He raised his fist, and the crowd shook the skies. His roar tore through the air, vibrating against the bones of everyone present. And then, at last, his gaze fell upon his opponent. A human. The champion tilted his head. His mouth twisted into a grin. To him, this was no fight. This was a gift. A chance to remind the galaxy why he was undefeated. He did not see Kane as a rival. He saw him as prey. The crowd knew it too. They smelled blood already. But Kane did not move. He did not flinch. His hand rested lightly on his blade, his eyes locked on the giant before him. Where the crowd saw prey, Zerath saw something different. Not fear, not pride, something colder, something quieter, a patience that did not belong in a prey animal. The announcer shouted once more. The challenge begins. Zerath, the undefeated. Elias Kane, the human warrior. May the gods witness the end. The arena's shields hummed to life, sealing the battlefield in a dome of energy. The sands vibrated under the power. Above them, banners of fire lit the sky. The time for laughter ended. For a long moment, the two figures stood still. The alien giant and the human warrior. Titan and mortal. Legend and challenger. The silence stretched so far that even the crowd grew restless. They waited for Kane to tremble, to bow, to collapse under the weight of what stood before him. But he did none of these things. Instead, Elias Kane whispered, so soft that only he could hear, "Even mountains fall." The words were carried away by the wind, but the conviction behind them was not. In that moment, the legend of Zerath met something new, something it had never faced before. Not another monster, not another titan, but a human with eyes that did not look up at a giant, but straight ahead at an enemy. The fight had not yet begun, but the galaxy felt it. Something different was about to happen, something no one expected. And for the first time in a century, the undefeated champion felt a faint echo of something dangerous. Not fear of the fight, but fear of the unknown. The silence inside the arena did not last long. The signal was given, and the great horn of Carvos Prime thundered through the air, shaking every wall and every soul who listened. It was a sound that meant only one thing. The fight had begun. Zerath moved first. The alien champion charged forward with a speed that no creature his size should have possessed. His massive frame blurred as his armored fist cut through the air, aimed straight at the small figure standing before him. The crowd gasped as one, expecting the fight to end in a single strike. But Kane was no statue. At the very last heartbeat, the human stepped aside, rolling across the sand. Zerath's blow struck the ground, splitting the stone beneath their feet. Dust exploded upward like smoke from a volcano. Shards of rock scattered across the arena. The shock wave rippled through the air, and still the human was standing. The audience roared, half in shock, half in delight. This was not the quick kill they had expected. Zerath lifted his fist, his grin widening. The human was fast, yes, but fast prey was still prey. He swung again, this time with both arms, a sweeping strike that could have knocked down a fortress wall. Kane ducked low, his movement sharp, controlled, every step measured. The giant's claws sliced through empty space, missing by a whisper. The crowd leaned forward in disbelief. The human was not only surviving, he was forcing the fight to continue. Kane's heart pounded, but his face showed no fear. He had trained for this moment. He had studied the champion's battles, not as entertainment, but as lessons. Every strike Zerath threw was powerful, yes, but also predictable. A rhythm lay beneath the chaos, a pattern in the storm. Cain had seen it, memorized it, prepared for it. But preparation was one thing. Facing it in reality was another. The ground shook with every movement of the alien champion. Dust filled the air. The sound of Zerath's roars echoed through the shields of the arena. And yet, Cain did not falter. He did not allow the noise to shake him. He kept his eyes on the target, watching, waiting. For the crowd, this was a strange sight. Zerath's opponents usually died quickly, screaming, begging, crushed beneath his blows. But this human, he was different. He did not scream. He did not beg. He did not even strike back yet. He simply moved, dodging death again and again, as though the giant's power meant nothing. The champion snarled. This was not how the fight was supposed to go. His attacks were not toys. They were storms of destruction. Yet, somehow, this fragile human slipped through them like water between fingers. At last, Cain acted. As Zerath raised his arm for another crushing strike, the human darted forward, blade flashing in the dim light. It was not a killing blow, not yet. Instead, Cain aimed the side of the alien's arm, where the armor plates shifted slightly during motion. The blade scraped across, leaving only a shallow mark, but the crowd gasped all the same. It was not the depth of the wound that mattered. It was the fact that the undefeated champion had been touched. Zerath froze for a single moment. His glowing eyes narrowed. Then, with a roar that shook the shield of the arena, he slammed his other arm downward, forcing Cain to leap back to safety. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some cheered in disbelief. Others screamed in anger. Never before had a human drawn blood from the champion, however small the cut. It was a first, and the galaxy had witnessed it. But Cain knew better than to celebrate. The wound was nothing. He had not come to scratch the surface of a legend. He had come to break it. Zerath's grin returned, but this time it was thinner, sharper, touched with something new. Interest. For the first time in years, he faced an opponent who did not crumble at his first strike. For the first time in a century, the fight was not already over. The giant began to circle, his steps slower now, more careful. He watched the human, as if seeing him for the first time. The laughter in the crowd faded into silence, as even the spectators sensed a shift. This was no longer an execution. This was becoming a battle. Cain breathed steadily, his blade ready at his side. He knew he could not outmatch Zerath's strength. He knew one wrong step would end him instantly. But he also knew something the giant had forgotten. Strength alone did not win battles. Patience, focus, and the will to endure could be sharper than any blade. The dust settled. The two warriors stared, and the arena trembled in anticipation. Then Zerath charged again. The first clash was not the end. It was the beginning. The human had survived. The legend had been marked. And though victory was still far away, the impossible no longer seemed unthinkable. The crowd did not know it yet, but history had just shifted. The arena was no longer laughing. Where once there had been jeers and mocking chants, now there was silence broken only by the crack of stone under Zerath's steps and the hiss of Cain's steady breathing. The crowd had expected a slaughter. Instead, they were witnessing something far more dangerous. A fight. Zerath circled his prey, with eyes glowing like fire. He had crushed warlords, beasts, and machines. He had faced armies and broken them alone. But this human, this small, fragile warrior who should have died in the first minute, still stood. Worse, he was unshaken. Cain adjusted his grip on the blade. His body was tense, but his mind was calm. He remembered every battle he had ever fought, every lesson carved into him by war. Strength could destroy cities, but strength without control always betrayed itself. And Zerath, for all his power, was a creature of habits. The alien champion struck again. His claws ripped through the air with a thunderous swing. Kane ducked low. Sand sprang against his visor as the blow missed. Another strike followed, this one from above, like a hammer meant to crush the human into the ground. Kane rolled. The shock wave blasted him off balance, but he caught himself and rose. The crowd gasped as Kane raised his blade, not to strike, but to signal. He was not running. He was not hiding. He was studying. Zerath growled, his voice deep as thunder. You cannot run forever, human. Kane's reply was quiet, almost lost in the roar of the arena. I don't need to run forever, only long enough. The champion's grin faded. Kane moved differently than anything Zerath had ever faced. The alien's past foes had met his power with more power. They tried to match his strength and were broken by it. But this human was playing a different game. He was smaller, faster, and clever in ways no monster could be. Every strike Zerath made gave Kane new information, timing, reach, rhythm. Piece by piece, the human was mapping the champion's movements like a puzzle. It infuriated Zerath. The alien roared and charged, slamming his massive frame into ground with bone-crushing force. Kane darted aside, the claws missing by inches. He countered with a slash, not deep but precise, cutting along the seam of the living armor near Zerath's hip. Another mark, another reminder that the champion could bleed. The crowd roared. Some cheered, others screamed in anger, but none could look away. Zerath spun, his fist lashing out like a falling star. The blow grazed Kane's shoulder, the impact sending pain shooting through his body. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. The audience gasped, think it was over. But Kane rose again, his blade still in hand, his eyes steady as stone. That single moment was enough to shake the legend. Zerath had expected fear. He had expected surrender. Instead, he saw defiance, pure and unbroken. Kane's voice carried across the silence. You fight like a beast, but beasts can be hunted. The insult burned through the alien's pride like acid. Zerath roared, charging again with reckless fury. His claws struck faster, heavier, tearing chunks of stone from the arena floor. Kane dodged, ducked, and weaved, his blade flashing just enough to leave another cut, another wound. Each movement was deliberate. He was not trying to kill yet. He was forcing Zerath to burn himself out. The human strategy became clear. He was not stronger, but he was smarter. Every giant step Zerath took drained energy. Every missed strike shook his body. And every cut Kane left behind bled away the illusion of perfection. The galaxy had always seen Zerath as untouchable. But now, with each mark, with each wound, that illusion cracked. Minutes dragged on. Sweat rolled down Kane's face, his muscles screaming in pain, but he pushed forward. He could not match the champion's raw strength, but he could endure. He could adapt. Humans always had. At last, Zerath staggered. Only for a breath, only for a moment, but it was there. The giant's chest heaved, his armor dripping with blood, his strikes growing slower. His fury had blinded him, and now the cost showed in every heavy step. The crowd could not believe what they were seeing. For a century, Zerath had been flawless, unstoppable. But this human, this nobody from a forgotten world, was breaking him, not with power, but with patience. Kane steadied himself, raising his blade once more. His body trembled, his lungs burned, but his eyes never left the champion. Even Titans fall, he whispered, the same words he had spoken at the start. Zerath roared again, but this time the sound was different. It was not triumph. It was frustration. It was the sound of a legend realizing it was mortal. The fight was far from over. Blood still needed to be spilled, but the balance had shifted. For the first time in 100 years, the undefeated champion was no longer hunting. He was being hunted. The battle in the arena had gone far longer than anyone expected. What was supposed to be a quick execution had turned into something unthinkable, a contest. Xerath, the undefeated champion, still towered like a god of war, but the cracks in his legend were beginning to show. And Elias Kane, the small, fragile human, was the one carving those cracks strike by strike. The crowd could feel the shift. They were no longer laughing. Their jeers had turned into silence, then gasps, then roars of disbelief. Across the galaxy, billions watched through hollow screens, some cheering, some shouting in anger, but all unable to look away. For the first time in living memory, the invincible alien was being tested. And then came the moment that changed everything. Xerath's fury only grew with every missed strike. His claws toward the ground, ripping stone into pieces. His roars made the shields tremble. But Kane moved with purpose, each step a calculation. He was not trying to match strength with strength. He was surviving, waiting, learning. The rhythm of the champion's attacks was becoming clear. Kane saw it. The slight delay after a heavy swing, the subtle pause when Xerath shifted his weight, the way his armor plates flexed just enough to leave openings. It was a rhythm hidden beneath chaos, and Kane was the only one who noticed. The human's lungs burned. His muscles screamed, but his eyes stayed sharp. He knew his chance would come, and when it did, he had to strike with everything he had. It happened in a single breath. Xerath lunged forward with a crushing swing, his claws aimed at Kane's chest. The ground split under the force of the strike. Kane rolled aside, but instead of retreating, he darted forward into the champion's blind spot. The crowd screamed as Kane raised his blade, his movement faster than their eyes could follow. His steel flashed, finding the gap beneath Xerath's ribs where the living armor shifted. The blade cut deep. For the first time in over a century, blood spilled from the undefeated champion. Alien ichor sprayed across the sand, glowing faintly under the arena lights. Xerath staggered back, his roar shaking the sky. The wound was not fatal, but it was real, undeniable, and it shattered the illusion of invincibility that had protected him for so long. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Billions of voices across the galaxy fell quiet. They had seen the impossible. The undefeated had been wounded. The crowd erupted, half in outrage, half in awe. Some screamed that it was a trick, that the human's blade must have been poisoned, enchanted, or blessed by gods. Others shouted that it was proof of prophecy, that the day would come when even titans would bleed before humanity. Inside the arena, Xerath's glowing eyes locked on Kane. Rage burned hotter than ever. He had been cut before in his rise to power, but never in the arena, never in front of the galaxy. His title, his legend, his very identity rested on the belief that he was untouchable. And now, a human had broken that illusion. "You dare," Xerath growled, his voice shaking the ground. "You dare wound me?" Kane stood tall, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He did not answer with words. He simply raised his blade again, its edge stained with alien blood. The gesture spoke louder than anything he could say. Xerath attacked with fury unlike anything before. His blows became faster, more reckless, driven by rage rather than strategy. Each strike sent shockwaves through the arena. Pillars crumbled. Dust filled the air like a storm. Kane was forced back, every dodge more desperate than the last. His muscles strained as he rolled, ducked, and slid under swings that could have flattened buildings. He had landed a wound, yes, but it had come at a cost. Now he was in the eye of the storm, facing a beast that fought with the rage of a wounded god. The human stumbled once, nearly caught by a sweeping claw. Pain exploded across his ribs as he was grazed, thrown onto the sand. The crowd screamed, certain it was over. But Kane forced himself to rise, blood dripping from his side. His vision blurred, his body trembled, but his spirit remained unbroken. Xerath laughed, a terrible sound. "You bleed too, human. You are nothing." But even as he spoke, he favored his side. The wound Cain had given him burning with every movement. He was still strong, still dangerous, but no longer flawless. Cain steadied himself, blade in hand. His mind worked through the pain. Zerath's rage was his weakness. Every missed strike drained him further. Every reckless lunge widened his defenses. Cain had turned the battle into a war of patience, and humans were masters of endurance. The two circled again, predator and prey, but the question of which was which had changed. Cain whispered to himself a soldier's mantra: survive, endure, wait. And when Zerath charged once more, Cain did not retreat. He stepped forward, ducking under the giant's swing, and slashed again at the wounded side. The blade cut deeper this time. Alien blood poured freely, staining the sand in dark rivers. Zerath howled, stumbling back. The crowd roared in disbelief. The champion, the legend, the god of war, was reeling across the stars. Entire worlds fell silent as they watched. Children who had grown up hearing stories of Zerath's invincibility now saw those stories crumble. Soldiers who fought against impossible odds felt their hearts rise with new hope. Leaders of empires whispered in fear, wondering what it meant if a human could do this. The wound was not just in Zerath's flesh. It was in the galaxy's belief. And Cain knew it. This fight was no longer just for survival. It was for something greater. It was proof that humans, no matter how small, no matter how underestimated, could stand against legends and make them bleed. Zerath clutched his side, his glowing eyes blazing with hatred. He was still alive, still powerful, but his aura of invincibility was shattered. The crowd no longer saw a god. They saw a warrior, wounded and mortal. Cain lowered his blade for only a moment, drawing in a shaky breath. His body was battered, his strength fading, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He had done what no one else dared to dream of. The fight was far from over. Zerath would not fall easily. But from this moment on, the galaxy would never see him the same way again, because the undefeated champion had been wounded, and it was a human who did it. Zerath raised his head and roared, a sound that shook the arena and echoed across the stars. It was not just rage. It was desperation. He knew what the wound meant. He knew what the galaxy had just witnessed. Cain stood his ground, bloody but unbowed. He raised his blade in silent defiance, the tip pointing at the champion. His voice carried just enough of the arena to hear. "You're not a god," he said. "You're just flesh and blood, and flesh can break." The word struck harder than any blade. The crowd fell silent once more, waiting, watching. The legend of Zerath was wounded. The story was no longer about his victories. It was about whether he could survive the human who had shattered his pride. The battle would rage on. Blows would fall. Blood would spill. But nothing would ever erase what had already happened. The galaxy had seen the impossible. The human had struck the first wound, and the legend of the undefeated champion would never be the same again. The wound had changed everything. The moment Cain's blade cut deep into Zerath's side, the galaxy shifted. For the first time in a century, the undefeated champion was bleeding before the eyes of billions. The sand drank the ichor of a legend, and the crowd was no longer certain of what they were seeing. The laughter was gone. The mockery had vanished. In its place was something the arena had not felt in living memory: doubt. Zerath's roar shook the air as he pressed his claw against the wound. His towering frame, still massive and terrifying, now looked less like an untouchable god and more like a living creature caught between fury and disbelief. He had crushed armies, torn apart war beasts, and silenced empires, but never had his body betrayed him like this. Pain spread across his ribs with every breath. The champion's glowing eyes locked on the human, And behind their fire was something new. It was not fear. It was not respect. It was rage sharpened into desperation. Elias Cain stood steady despite the ache in his ribs and the blood dripping from his own wounds. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his blade remained firm in his hands. He had studied the champion for months. He had mapped every strike, memorized every rhythm, and now he had done what no alien titan could. He had broken the illusion. The giant could be hurt. The giant could be made to stumble. The giant could bleed. The crowd erupted again, their voices splitting between two tides. Some screamed for the human's death, demanding Zerath crush him for daring to scar the legend. Others shouted in awe, praising the impossible courage of a human who refused to bow. Across the galaxy, soldiers, leaders, and ordinary people leaned closer to their holoscreens, their hearts pounding, their faith in Zerath shaken to its core. Zerath charged again, his fury boiling into reckless force. His claws sliced through the air with thunderous power, gouging trenches in the sand, cracking stone pillars as though they were brittle wood. Cain dodged left, then right, his movements sharp and controlled. He felt the tremor of each missed strike rattle through his bones, but he stayed focused. Zerath's rage was not his strength now. It was his weakness. Every lunge was faster, heavier, but less precise. The champion was burning his own body, bleeding energy with every wild swing. Cain countered not with power, but with precision. He darted forward between two massive claws, slashing across Zerath's thigh. The blade left another wound, shallow but bleeding. He slipped back before the counterstrike landed, narrowly avoiding claws that could have torn him in half. Another cut, another mark, another reminder that Zerath's body was no longer invincible. The giant bellowed, stumbling for half a step before planting his claws deep into ground to steady himself. His armor pulsed. His breathing came louder, and the sand beneath him darkened with spreading blood. His aura of perfection was gone. Cain whispered to himself through gritted teeth, "Keep cutting. Keep breaking him." The fight dragged on, every second longer than the last. Zerath's rage only grew, but so did his mistakes. His claws slammed into the arena wall, sending cracks spiraling across the stone. He swung downward, and Cain rolled aside, leaving the blow to shatter the ground. The giant's fist stuck for half a breath, and in that instant, Cain leapt forward and drove his blade across Zerath's knee. The cut was deep, tearing through armor and into flesh. Zerath howled, dropping to one knee, the ground trembling beneath his weight. The crowd screamed in shock, unable to process what they were seeing. The champion, the mountain of the arena, was kneeling, not by choice, but because a human had forced him down. The roar of the galaxy was deafening. Entire worlds stopped what they were doing to watch. Generals who once feared Zerath's name clenched their fists with new hope. Children who had grown up believing in his invincibility saw their parents whisper in disbelief. And through it all, Cain stood with his blade ready, his eyes cold, his body screaming in pain but refusing to stop. Zerath pushed himself back up, his knee trembling, his blood dripping in rivers. His grin was gone. The fire in his eyes burned darker, not with joy, but with a desperate hunger to reclaim what had been taken from him. "You will die, human," he growled, his voice shaking the air. "You will die and be forgotten." Cain answered, his voice steady despite the exhaustion tearing at him. "Maybe, but not before the galaxy remembers who broke you." The words cut deeper than the blade. The champion lunged again, roaring with a fury that echoed like thunder, but his body betrayed him. His steps were slower now. His wounds bled heavier. His swings, though still powerful enough to kill, left openings Cain could see clearer than ever. The giant was no longer untouchable. He was weakening. Cain ducked low, driving his blade upward across Zerath's arm. Sparks and blood sprayed into the air. The giant recoiled, slamming his massive body into Kane, sending him sprawling across the sand. Pain ripped through the human's chest, but he forced himself back to his feet. He spat blood, tightened his grip, and stepped forward once again. The arena was silent now. No laughter, no jeers. The crowd had become witnesses to something greater than a fight. They were watching the breaking of a legend. Zerath staggered, his knees shaking, his chest heaving. Blood coated his side, his leg, his arm. His claws still gleamed with deadly strength. But his body no longer obeyed as it once had. The human had taken pieces of him. Strike by strike, wound by wound, Kane steadied his breath, ignoring the burning in his muscles. He knew the fight was not yet won. The giant could still kill him in a heartbeat. But he also knew the tide had turned. The champion was falling, not in one blow, but in many. He was being broken. The humans circled him now, not with arrogance, but with purpose. He moved like a hunter closing on prey, his eyes sharp, his blade steady. Zerath turned slowly, his once fluid movements heavy, his aura of dominance shattered. For the first time in a century, the undefeated champion looked mortal. The crowd could not believe it. The galaxy could not believe it. Yet none could deny what their eyes showed. Kane had done what armies, beasts, and machines could not. He had dragged a god down to the level of flesh and blood. Zerath roared again, lifting himself for one last desperate charge. The ground split under his weight as he hurled his body forward, claws outstretched to tear the human apart. Kane did not retreat. He stepped toward the charge, his body burning, his mind clear. With perfect timing, he slid beneath the swing and drove his blade deep into the wounded knee once more. The giant collapsed with a roar that shook the heavens, his body crashing to the sand. The arena itself seemed to quake with the fall. Kane stood over him, chest heaving, blade dripping. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply raised his weapon, prepared to finish what he had begun, and the galaxy held its breath. The giant lay on the arena floor, his body shaking, his breath ragged. Zerath, the undefeated champion, the terror of 100 worlds, was down on one knee, blood staining the sand. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy saw him not as a god of war, but as a wounded creature gasping for strength. The crowd that once cheered his every strike now sat frozen, unable to believe what their eyes told them. Elias Kane stood opposite him, battered and bleeding, his body bruised and near its limit. His ribs ached with every breath, his vision blurred with sweat and blood, but he remained upright. His blade, chipped and stained, still gleamed under the arena lights. The human's chest rose and fell like a war drum, steady and unbroken. He had done the impossible. He had dragged a god down to ground. Zerath growled, the sound low and guttural. His claws dug into the sand as he forced himself upright. Each movement was heavy. Each breath labored, but the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. Pride, fury, and desperation clashed within him. He could not accept defeat. To him, defeat was death. To fall before a human was unthinkable. His entire existence revolved around being invincible. And yet here he was, trembling, his armor shattered, his blood staining the arena floor. "You cannot win," Zerath snarled, his voice breaking into a roar. "I am the champion. I am eternal." Kane raised his blade, his body screaming with pain, and answered with a steady voice. "You're just flesh, and flesh breaks." The words cut deeper than any blade. Zerath charged, summoning the last of his strength, his body moving with the fury of desperation. His claws slashed, his roar shook the sky, his every strike filled with the rage of a cornered beast. But he was slower now, his power fading with every movement. Kane dodged, narrowly escaping death each time, his body trembling from exhaustion, yet fueled by something greater. The will to endure. He countered with precision, his blade cutting across Zerath's arm, drawing another spray of blood. The champion swung wildly, and Cain rolled beneath, slashing at the ribs where the first wound bled freely. Each strike chipped away at the giant, each cut pulling him closer to collapse. The crowd had become silent again, their voices caught in their throats as they watched the impossible unfold. Across the galaxy, billions leaned forward, breaths held, unable to look away. This was no longer a fight. It was history being carved into the bones of the universe. Zerath stumbled. His leg gave out, forcing him onto one knee again. His claws struck the sand, leaving deep gouges as he tried to rise. The mighty Titan who had crushed empires now struggled simply to stand. His glowing eyes flickered with rage, but behind it was something he had not felt in a century: fear. Cain advanced, step by step, his blade ready. His body felt like it could collapse at any moment, but his spirit burned brighter with each step. The champion was weakening. The mountain was crumbling, and Cain knew this was the moment. Zerath lifted his head, his voice breaking. "I cannot fall, not to you, not to a human." Cain stopped just out of reach, his blade aimed at the giant's chest. His voice carried across the arena, steady and final. Legends fall. Even gods fall. And when they do, it's always at the hands of those no one expects. With a roar, Zerath lunged one last time, his claws striking forward in a desperate bid to crush the human. But Cain had been waiting. He sidestepped, raised his blade, and drove it forward with all his strength. The steel pierced deep into Zerath's chest, breaking through armor, flesh, and bone. The roar that followed shook the arena to its foundations. Zerath's body convulsed, his claws swiping wildly at the air before falling limp. His glowing eyes dimmed as the strength drained from him. The Titan staggered, his massive frame swaying, then collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash that sent tremors across the sand. Silence. The galaxy had just witnessed the fall of the undefeated champion. Cain stood over the body, his blade buried in the chest of the fallen giant. His chest heaved, his blood dripping onto the sand, but his stance remained steady. He looked down at the alien who had once been worshipped as a god of war and spoke with quiet certainty. "You were never eternal. You were only waiting for someone like me." The crowd erupted, a roar of voices that shook the very dome of the arena. Some screamed in fury, others in awe, but none could deny what had happened. Zerath, the undefeated, the untouchable, the breaker of empires, was dead. And it was a human, a forgotten soldier from a world few respected, who had shattered his legend. Across the galaxy, shockwaves spread. In the great halls of alien rulers, whispers turned into shouts. In the barracks of soldiers, cheers erupted. On distant colonies, children looked to the stars with new wonder. Humanity, long dismissed as weak, fragile, and ordinary, had proven something no one could ignore. They could not only fight, they could win. The arena announcer's voice trembled as he spoke. His words carried across every screen, every speaker, every world. "The champion has fallen. The human warrior Elias Cain stand victorious." The declaration echoed like thunder across the stars. The legend of Zerath was broken, and in its place, a new legend began to rise. The legend of humanity. Cain fell to one knee, his body finally giving into exhaustion. His vision blurred, his breaths came ragged, but he refused to collapse completely. He had not come this far to die on the sand. He forced himself to remain upright, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Zerath's massive body lay still, his blood soaking the arena. His reign had ended not in glory, but in defeat, and that defeat would haunt the galaxy forever. In the silence that followed, Cain lifted his head toward the crowd. His eyes, though weary, burned with defiance. He did not raise his arms in victory. He did not bask in their voices. He simply stood, the image of a human who had faced the impossible and endured. The galaxy would remember this day, not as the day a champion fell, but as the day humanity proved itself, the day one soldier showed that even legends could be shattered. The cameras closing on his bloodied face, his steady eyes, his unbroken stance. Billions watched, and in their hearts, something shifted. Fear turned into awe. Mockery turned into respect. Doubt turned into belief. And so the story of Zareth ended, and the story of Elias Kane began. It would be told across the stars, whispered in the shadows of empires, sung in the taverns of soldiers, and etched into the memory of every race. The tale of the human who broke the undefeated champion. As the medics rushed into the arena, as the crowd continued to roar, as the galaxy trembled with the weight of what it had just witnessed, Kane whispered to himself, so soft only he could hear, "It's done. The giant has fallen." The words drifted into the silence of the arena, carried away by the wind, but they would never be forgotten, because the day the undefeated champion fell was the day humanity rose.